Are we on? All right.
All right.
Todd. All right. Hey, I'm John Ream, Ream Bennett Moore Law Firm here in Lincoln, Nebraska. This is our second episode of the Nebraska Workers' Compensation Podcast, Zoom, whatever we're doing, calling it right now. It's just a conversation among the four lawyers about some issues in workers' compensation. You can find our last discussion from last month on Facebook Live. It's on YouTube, and Haley got it up on one of the podcast platforms as well. So we have a podcast now. So and our episode last month was most important things to do in your workers' compensation case. Pretty wide-ranging discussion. We're going to be a little narrower today. So I'll just go ahead and have everybody introduce themselves, and I'll kick off the topic and get the discussion started. So who wants to start? Who wants to introduce themselves first?
I'm Rod Ream.
All right. Todd?
Todd Bennett.
All right. And
Who's the last guy?
yeah.
I'm Roger Moore. I'm the good-looking one.
Yeah. And
No
yeah, Haley
007
Gonzalez.
in this office.
Jeez. Yeah, Haley Gonzalez is our producer from our marketing firm. So anyway, all right. I want to lead off with talking. We're going to talk this month about nurse case managers. Who are they? What do they do? And why we don't like them? So Roger's showing up big on my screen. So I'll start with Roger. Roger, who are nurse case managers and what do they do and why don't we like them here at this firm?
Well, they're nurse case managers. These are individuals that have a medical background of some type of nursing that are hired by insurance companies to monitor the workers' compensation claim as it goes forward. And these are individuals who sometimes will show up to doctor's visits without even giving you any advance notice that they're going to, that go into the doctor's appointments with you. And they tell clients that they're there to try and help make sure they get all the medical care that they need. In practice, that's not actually what happens in our experience. And
well, Roger, do they promote the actual benefit for medical care for injured workers?
Well, they say they do. They say they promote that benefit and make sure you get all the medical care involved. The reality is they're there to save the insurance company money. They're there to pressure doctors to release people back to work sooner than they probably should have. And then I've had nurse case managers that just out and out trash people behind their backs. They mentioned they've got bankruptcies pending or they're behind another child support or anything else they can do to kind of disparage the injured workers that know nothing, that has nothing to do with their workers' compensation claim.
Right.
Those are some of the issues that I've had with them personally over the years.
Well, Rod, do you think it's smart to have a case manager on the case?
Well, it's smart for the insurance company, but there's very seldom or very rarely is it smart for the worker to trust that nurse case manager. There's just so many things that they can do to minimize benefits that a worker is going to get by telling doctors that there's actual light duty available for somebody to go back to work early and then there's not. And people end up getting fired and all kinds of things from what certain of those nurse case managers do. Some are more aggressive than others.
Right. Well, I use that word smart, and John, maybe if you know the case smart.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna bring that up, Todd, and I was gonna ask you that since you're the resident workers' comp case expert. Case Smart versus Scribner. I dialed it up.
Right.
You want to look it up. Smart versus Scribner / Food for Less, 254 Nebraska 111 holds that nurse case management services provided on behalf of an insurance company are not things that benefit workers. So the Nebraska Supreme Court has said nurse case management services do not benefit workers. I mean, that's settled case law. So Yeah, I mean, and so I think that's an important thing to bring up because a lot of these nurse case managers, particularly if you read their jargon and their blog posts or on LinkedIn or on social media, talk about patient advocacy, and it rings hollow. It's disingenuous. I could use some other words, but this is a family podcast, so
Right.
try to keep things professional and non-disparagement. So, but I'm sure people can come up with some other terms that are less
Well,
professional. So,
and I use that word smart because obviously that's the name of the case, and they are the right hand of the person of the adjuster making the decision on the case. But I also use it for injured workers are smart people. They know how to get to their doctors. They know where they're going, what treatment they're supposed to be after, and what they're looking for. They don't need a case manager that has some extra knowledge or smartness to them. Because they don't. The injured workers are just as smart, if not smarter, than the caseworker on the case.
yeah, and sometimes it's a good thing that maybe for an injured, sometimes you go to the doctor with somebody else too. I mean, sometimes people are better like have a friend or a family member go with you. And that's real common. Maybe the other person can describe the symptoms better and take your own advocate with you. So that's a good hint too. At our firm, why don't we like to have the nurse case managers in contact with our client? That's always something that the ones at least that are ethical, they're nurse case managers. If they know we're working on a case, they tell us they usually will back off and not contact people. Why don't we like to have nurse case managers in direct contact with our clients? Todd, you want to lead off? Roger?
Well, I think we've actually all kind of hit on the point that they're having ex parte communications with the physician for the benefit of the insurance company, and call it what you want, but cost saving measures, whether it's getting it to a doctor that they want to, or referral, or cutting down physical therapy and pain management and those things, because they are the right hand of the adjuster making a decision on the case. And it's just not a smart idea to have them when they're leading and monitoring or manipulating the medical care for an injured worker, especially when it's a litigated case.
What's for non-lawyers, ex parte means a conversation without other people in the room with you, a private conversation.
Yeah, they're having a conversation without a lawyer present, or frankly, even their husband or anybody that's actually on their side.
Yeah, and in the worst case, they talk to the doctor without the patient there. I mean, that's really what a lot of them try to do, is they'll have meetings either after or before the patient's our client's appointment with the doctor, to either set them up to believe something about the work or whatever. I mean, it's outrageous, and they don't have a right to be in the room with the doctor, is my understanding. That there's no legal right to allow them in the room.
No, they can't manipulate the care. And I guess that's a question for you, Roger. What if a case manager wants to talk to the doctor before and after, or insist on being in the room with the patient or the injured worker?
Well, as I tell my clients, as we've touched on, they don't have any right to be in there with the doctor and the patient. So I always advise them that if they're in the room, that they tell the doctor that they don't want the case manager to be in the room with them when they're meeting with the doctor. We have a much more limited basis to prevent the case manager from speaking with the doctor before and after the appointments, but the patient can always request to be part of those conversations, and ask the doctor to make them aware of those conversations when they occur. But they have to be to communicate those issues to the doctor so that their concerns are taken care of to the greatest extent possible.
Well, and this thing about talking with the doctors is kind of devious. The doctor's offices know that our client isn't going to pay their bill. The nurse case manager's client is going to pay the bill. And it's very concerning to me when one of my clients has a doctor agree to talk to the nurse case manager without him or her in the room. It says something about the doctor, unfortunately. It makes me wonder what their concerns are, whether it's the patient or making sure they have a good relationship with an insurance company.
And I
Right.
think it's good to talk about the doctor and those relationships. You know, we could talk, I kind of have it on the outline to talk about that a little bit later, but there's a couple other things. I mean, first of all, you've got some stranger coming into an examination room with you and your doctor. I mean, and a lot of people that may not know anything about workers' compensation would wonder, why is this person here? What about my confidentiality? What about my privacy? Why can a nurse case manager participate in a workers' compensation claim? I mean, why is it legal for them to do so? And it is, but why can they in Nebraska?
Well, in Nebraska, there's no law or rule that says they cannot be or prohibited from being in a case, but there's also no rule or law prohibiting an injured worker to say, I don't want to work with one.
Sure.
So which kind of, as you say, goes back to the doctor, where the doctor's got to have, you know, no pun intended, but a backbone who's going to stick up for the worker, because there's no rule that they got to actually be communicating with them. There's no obligation to do so. And it's totally up to them in their office.
But when you file a workers' compensation case, I mean, don't you give up some of your right to privacy, and particularly in regards to your medical records?
Yeah, you do. I mean, the statute says that the medical privilege is suspended if you're making a workers' comp claim. But that doesn't grant the right to have a doctor in the middle of a medical exam and things like that.
I guess I would supplement that by saying I typically would preclude the insurance company from getting records if it's purely a physical injury relating to mental health treatment, psychological treatment, drug and alcohol abuse. Those are things that are frequently in the releases that I see from my clients, and I'm sure the rest of us as well. And I cross that stuff out. So there is a pretty broad allowance to have access to medical records, but there are some limitations that you can put upon their ability to get those records.
Yeah.
Right. Especially since it may or may not be an issue in the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's just trying to drag digging around in records that aren't relevant is I view as an effort to try to just dirty up the client and make a client look bad to the court.
A lot of times, I think, from my experience, that backfires. I had an experience where a defendant brought a whole bunch of stuff up about a client that's completely irrelevant, and it just backfired against the employer. So yeah, it goes lots of different ways. So we've talked about why some doctors cooperate with nurse case managers. And Rod, you talked about payer, since the nurse case manager is essentially the right hand of the payer, that's one reason why they listen to nurse case managers. But are there other reasons why doctors may cooperate with a nurse case manager?
Well,
and that's for anybody, not just Rod.
Doctors are human beings, and they have their own attitudes and their own views of the legal system and things like that. And those of us that participate heavily in the workers' comp area, including nurse case managers, insurance adjusters, lawyers, judges, we have some idea about whether a doctor is pretty protective of the client and keeps them off work until they're really sure there's no danger, or whether the doctor is kind of a pat him on the back in the game kind of doctor, which people that participate know doctors' tendencies, and nurse case managers get involved heavily in picking doctors. And they come at the clients with some line that, well, I know a really good doctor that really is great surgeon of whatever, you name it, the back, the neck, the hand, whatever. And clients don't know any better unless, or injured workers don't know any better. And I'm not saying there are bad doctors. There are doctors that write and sympathize, write letters, write reports, and tend to sympathize with the interests of business and insurance. And that's reality. That's what we deal with every day.
Right.
Right.
Todd, Roger, anything that Todd, your thoughts on that one? I'm just going to go down
Well,
the line.
well, just for an example, I mean, a recent case where we were barely on the case a week, and the case manager, not only you find out in less than 7 days that they have cut off the family physician from treating the injured worker, but they've actually got him out of their family physician, sent him, for example, clear across the state to another doctor that they chose that the patient never seen before. And unfortunately, if you don't know the exact what the law says that gives you the right to stay with your family physician or any referral from your family physician, they feel obligated to actually go with the doctor that the case manager is approving. And then it becomes a practical problem that the doctor, they're not going to potentially treat someone if they know they're not getting paid. But,
Roger, what's your thoughts on this? And I've got a few too. So I'm just going to go through.
I guess I would liken the nurse case manager situation. If you think about the health insurance industry in general, and you think about when HMOs came around, and doctors were concerned that the insurance companies were controlling the standard of care and the methodology of treatment that they've been taught and trained in for years. This goes a step beyond that. This is kind of having their own little agent in the doctor's office, and on top of the other restrictions and treatment that are already there. And as Todd indicated, they'll refer them to different doctors. In 20 years, I can't say I've ever had a nurse case manager advise a client, for instance, that they have a right to choose their own surgeon. In fact, it's usually the opposite. They tell them, you have to go with this doctor. This is the doctor that we've chosen. You're stuck with them. So just another indication that they're not there to help the injured worker. They're there to help the insurance company's bottom line. We've seen records that have been disclosed on accident that actually have nurse case managers bragging to insurance companies how much they've saved them because they've convinced the doctor not to do a surgery that they thought might be appropriate. That's very troubling.
Yeah, it is. And a couple of things about nurse case managers. I mean, some of them, particularly those who are workers' comp coordinators for like some of the big packing houses, at least they used to be one. Some of them aren't even nurses. That's one.
Yeah.
Two, I think reasons why doctors will sometimes leave nurse case managers, just besides the fact that they pay the bill, is they've got, well, especially particularly the specialists will oftentimes have pre-existing relationships with them. They're talking to them, day in and day out. And if they build up trust with them, you're at a disadvantage. And the other thing that nurse case managers can do in conjunction with the insurance companies is they can provide work, off work. They can give like job descriptions and seem like they're being helpful in that return to work process. And I've got a case right now where some case manager concocted a work restriction agreement that was completely one-sided. And again, they're just those types of agreements are things that they use for people that are narcotics patients, which again, it's a stigma. And they work to further stigmatize and injured workers through use of these paperworks. And, like Roger said, hints that the person's a drug user or has alcohol problems. So, there's lots of reasons why, doctors that are otherwise good may end up going with, why we end up believing nurse case managers. And you have the right to change your doctor too, particularly if it's a surgery. That's even if you lost that out front, if it's a serious injury and you have surgery, you can move doctors. So any other thoughts about that from the other lawyers on this?
well, one thing that I can even pose to you, Rod, is and explain. A lot of people, maybe it's so obvious, but nobody asks the question: who pays the bill for the case manager? Who pays them?
Well, it's like there's a phrase in politics, which is kind of timely, that you follow the money. And the nurse case managers are paid handsomely, their firms, by the insurance companies and the employers. They bill out at like $200 an hour or $200 an hour for their time. And that's not nothing.
That's what lawyers bill out, defense lawyers bill out for workers' comp. That's about what their hourly rate is a lot of the time.
Might be more.
So.
Yeah.
But and Rod alluded to this a little earlier too, that the return to work aspect of it has some troubling issues where either they're not informed about what the job duty is, or they're just flat out misrepresenting what the return to work option is for them. In some cases, just making up positions, and there's seems to be a disconnect between the nurse case manager and the actual employer, where the nurse case manager might have said to the doctor, "Oh, we've got this great job. He's going to be sitting at a chair all day long, and he's going to be able to put up his leg." You take that to the employer, and the employer seems to know nothing about it. So you can't even rely upon what they're saying as between what they're representing their client can do in some cases. So it just further diminishes the value that they add to the case from the injured worker standpoint.
Well, and the practical effect of those kind of maneuvers are to either make people literally suffer for doing a job that isn't appropriate, or they quit. And if they quit, they lose their benefits. And there's an economic hardship that arises from some of these activities of the nurse case managers. I don't think any of us are saying they do that on every case all the time, but we see it enough that we know it's real. It's a tactic. It's a tactic to hold down the cost to the insurance company. Every week that they can say a person is denying working, and they don't have to pay workers' comp like they're supposed to injured people recuperating.
And maybe going back to maybe more of the fundamentals of workers' comp and nurse case managers and what they do, and just so people understand how workers' comp cases work. In workers' compensation, isn't most of the time, at least we have most of lawyers agree with me, vast majority of the time, most of the medical evidence comes in by medical report rather than by live testimony. That's everybody's experience, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can somebody talk to me how, Rod and I were talking about how nurse case managers almost, maybe they don't write the medical records, but they certainly massage the medical records and kind of sometimes direct the doctors to, in regards to the medical records. Can somebody talk a little bit more about that? Because we're down to about 5 minutes.
Well, the way that there's so many tactics that go on here, but actually the way that the work is explained to the doctors in terms of when an injury arises, sometimes the nurse case managers are in there and telling things that will just kill the case. So the doctors won't make a connection between the work and the injury. And, that's an example of a medical records problem. And it's pretty common when people go into with a work injury that they don't know exactly what they're supposed to say. They don't know that they need to tell the doctor that there was a certain date that something happened, and the nurse case managers don't help them with that. I know that for darn sure. I've seen plenty of instances where, the people just kind of go along with this nurse case manager, and then, oh, wow, this isn't workers' comp. You're out of luck.
Right, which actually comes to kind of what we were talking about in the debates last night and last week about pre-existing conditions. That's one of the first things that a case manager will bring up in the medical record. Doesn't matter how long ago, could be a year, could be 5, could be 10 years, and they all want to bring up this pre-existing problem. So the doctor relates the current issue to a prior problem that the person had, and it really doesn't have any relevance other than it existed, but it wasn't a problem that they were seeing from currently.
Yeah.
But that's classic that they will pull that out of a medical record.
Yeah, I mean, in Nebraska, we just have to show that the injury made things worse. It's called contributing cause factor, which is pretty lenient. So besides, bringing up old injuries that may not be relevant or probably aren't relevant, what other kind of tricks, more prominent tricks and common tricks in nurse case managers? And we're down to about 3 minutes here. So kind of almost final thoughts time.
Well, in some cases, when you have these ex parte conversations between the nurse case manager and the doctor's office, the doctor will actually record what the nurse has told them in the actual treatment notes. So when records are disclosed, you get the treatment notes showing the conversations and some of these accusations that the nurse case manager has made against the injured party. So that's another way for him to kind of sneak in these little jabs at the injured worker that the judge might see in a record form later on.
All right. Rod, kind of last thought, maybe kind of wrap it up. Last thoughts about nurse case managers.
Well, I think nurse case managers are an example of how the workers' comp system is a little bit more complicated than most workers think it is. They have if they're hurt the first time, they expect to be treated fairly, and they expect to have their word honored and to be believed, and to be dealing with people that are looking out for them. And that's really not true in terms of nurse case managers in particular. And I know some of them, if they look at this, will be offended, but that's, I'll call it like I see it. And
Yeah.
People need to be aware of the problems like this, because they can have a heck of an effect on their health and life if they let somebody who's not acting in their best interest run the show.
Todd?
And that's kind of what I was going to say to end it was, an insurance company has this person not only being the right hand of the person making the decisions on the case, but they're doing everything to get all the records, talk to the physicians, where an injured worker, unless they have someone represent them, they don't have that capability to have their own built-in witness, and a lot of times fact and a medical witness that supports their claim.
Okay.
So the last little tidbit, they got to be smart. Just like the Supreme Court said, it's not a benefit to the injured worker. So,
All right. Well, kind of my quick final thought is going back into the campaign season. There's definitely collusion between the nurse case manager, the insurance company, and the employers oftentimes. And I got a couple of blog posts on that. One I wrote back in August: who is this nurse case manager? Why are they talking to my doctor? I've written a couple of other things about collusion in workers' comp between nurse case managers and insurance companies. So I've got another one coming out next week about this work restriction form. So I'd like to thank I'd like to thank Rod, Todd, Roger for joining us today. Thank Haley for putting everything together. And this will be up on YouTube. It'll be up on Facebook, and it'll be on Spotify. And I remembered our podcast network, and hopefully up on some other networks too, or some other platforms. So talk to everybody later.
you bet.
All right.
Be safe, everybody.
Thanks. All right.
Back to work. Stop screwing off, guys.
All right.
That's
Thanks.
right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.